Well, welcome. This is God Talk. I'm glad you're with us today, and I'm excited to be with you. They asked me to do a week of prayer over at the La Sierra Spanish Church, where we're now sort of tied in. We help do the English service there. So we had to do it like taping, the empty church with the virus and all that. So I worked pretty hard to put a week together, what I call a Big God series. That in the middle of all this craziness in our world, and to say, where is God? I needed to do it for myself, just to remind myself, our God is a big God, and He's going to get us through this somehow. So I'm going to share some of those with LLBN over the last couple of weeks and now the weeks to come. Let me just jump right into the story that today is about David and when he ended up in a cave. David's flying high. He's the king. He's supposed to be the king. He's been anointed to be the king. His father sends him to check on his brothers. He gets there and he sees this giant who was just defying God and challenging someone to come out and fight him. And David says, why isn't somebody fighting this man who was defying God? And Saul said, you're just a boy. And David says, yes, okay, but I've killed the lion and I killed the bear. And maybe you have killed a lion and a bear. But David is not going to stop there. He's going to go on and kill a giant. Sometimes we get this far, we kill the lion, we kill the bear. Okay, good. But God has giants for us to kill. Don't be satisfied with the lions and the bears when there's giants still in the land. What giants have you killed this year? What big projects just weighed on you and you got them done? They're out of the way. You knock them down, you cut off their heads, and they don't have power over you anymore. What giants are still sort of defying you? And you're hiding in the trenches, and God says, don't accept that. Go find a rock and let God help you knock that giant down and cut off the head. And don't let that giant mock you anymore. Some project, some sin, some battle that is still bothering you. And just say, enough already. In our house, we call it killing the frog. It's from a time management program. Kill the frog, eat the frog, eat the frog. The first thing in the morning, do the hardest thing. Get the giants out of the way. Don't accept just the lions and the bears. David now killed Goliath. All the women are singing about him. It says, Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. All of Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle. David's at the top of his game. Everything he touches turns to gold. And he is popular and everyone is singing for him. He gets to marry the king's daughter. He is rolling. Then it all begins to fall apart and go south. Saul gets jealous, tries to throw a spear. Now David got to leave. Lost his job. Yeah. He loses his wife. Saul finds out that his wife helped David climb out the window and get away. Saul takes his wife and gives it to someone else. Lost his job, lost his wife. Samuel dies. Samuel was his giant, his mentor. Samuel is where David got to hear the voice of God. The Lord said, now Samuel's gone. He's on his own. He loses Jonathan. Jonathan's his best friend. Jonathan warns him. Jonathan helps him. Saul finds out Jonathan's cut off. David ends up going over to the Philistines. Goliath was a Philistine. David killed a Philistine, and now he doesn't know where else to go. He goes to the Philistines. It says, David escaped from Saul and went to King Achish of Gath. So David is living with the Philistines. He's lost his country, his job, his wife, his best friend, the voice of God in his life, and he is with his enemies. He is so freaked out about what will happen there. He begins to go insane, and he's frothing and foaming at the mouth, and he's making marks on the gates. And the king says, am I so short of maniacs? You got to send me this guy? That's how low David has come. Supposed to be the king. Too bad. And he ends up in the cave of Adullam, hiding from Saul. The cave is where you end up when everything else has gone wrong. All your props, all your support system, the people that you usually rely on, your money or your health or whatever, and you end up in a cave. David is in a cave all alone. And it says in Psalm 142, he wrote this psalm while he was in the cave. And it says, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. All by himself in a cave. You've been in a cave? Maybe you're in a cave right now. Maybe you've lost your job. Maybe, we're all quarantined like this, but some people have it worse than others. You're in a cave. Or you've had a cave time. If you haven't had one now, it's coming. When all the props that you're used to are gone. You feel like throwing in the towel. Now, how many times I've gone home, see Hilda, I want to quit. Where do you want to go? People are mad at you at the church, or there's not enough money, or there's just politics. There's some problem. Somehow this came up. The lady that we did an ordination for back in 1995, Hallie Wilson, she passed away. Wonderful lady, pastor. But it brought all that memory of that back when I'm a young pastor. Well, I was 40, 41. And I'm in the middle of this women's ordination fray. I had no plans to be there. I didn't plan to be the martyr for this. And all of a sudden, I'm going to have to preach a sermon where I know the church is going to be divided. I'm a pastor. I don't want to divide my church. I got phone calls and emails from high church leaders, and you know these people's names, threatening me with my career. One leader wrote that I was Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, the rebellious ones. I went up to Pine Springs Ranch to be at a meeting we call The Journey, and some of the pastors gathered around me, and they could tell. I was in a cave. Gathered around, laid their hands on me. I can tell you 100 more times. In a cave. David's in a cave. Wilderness time. Between the time that David killed Goliath and the time he became the king. 10 years in the wilderness. He's anointed to be the king. He's not a king. He's in a cave. Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days. Moses in the wilderness for 40 years. Paul for 3 years out in the desert. Most of the time, there's a cave time before it all works out. Elijah's out in the wilderness. Israel's walking around 40 years in the wilderness before they cross over to the promised land. Israel's in Babylon for 70 years. These are cave times. And you begin to ask, where is God? Not supposed to be like this. We're God's covenant people. We belong to Him. We have your name. God, come on. We're the remnant church. Shouldn't be in a cave like this. I pay tithe, God. Where's the blessing? And then it gets worse. Saul finds out that David got some help from the priests, so he kills all the priests. 85 priests and all their wives and all their children because of him. How do you carry that around? David goes back to the Philistines. He's going to march with the Philistines. You're marching with the enemy against your own people. The king gets freaked out. He's afraid David will turn on him, turns him away. David and his group of men end up going back to their little village of Ziklag. and it's been burned to the ground. There's no one there. The wives and children are all gone. Animals are gone, and the houses have been burned flat. And his own soldiers were picking up stones to stone him to death. This is a cave time. It says, David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. And his own men were talking about stoning him. Had not one person on his side. And now we come to one of the great verses of the Bible, the verse for this sermon. 1 Samuel 30, verse 6. I've given this verse to hundreds of people. It said, David strengthened himself in the Lord. Another version, David encouraged himself in the Lord. Yes, there are times when God uses people. Those pastors that gathered around me, God's used people many times. Send you a card, send you an email. Pastor Dan, we appreciate that sermon. Okay, maybe I can go another week. Money comes in the mail. God uses people, counselors, support people, who will love you. But there are times when there is no one, and you are by yourself, and you have to be able to find encouragement from God through thousands and millions of miles of space. And God will come, and he will be with you. And David strengthened himself in the Lord. Do you know how to find God all by yourself? And you just have to know this is not going to be the end. David's still going to be king. The crazy thing is, David doesn't know that. We know it because we know the whole story. David is in a cave. He's looking at Ziklag, and it's all been gone, and he knows he's been anointed to be the king, and he is not to the king. And to hold on to your faith, to say, this is my destiny, this is what I've been called to do, and it is going to work out. Hold on to that. John Ortberg, speaking about this, he said, God does some of his best work in caves. When you're in the down times and you're in a cave time, God can use those times to strengthen you and make good come out of it. I was at La Sierra Church years ago. We'd already done one huge remodeling. And then some people campaigned to me, Pastor Dan, we need to do the restrooms. People judge a church by its restrooms. Ours were not good, old-fashioned. So I said, how much? Well, they told me the first bid, $30,000 or so. Well, okay, it's a lot of money, but okay, we'll work on it. 6 bathrooms. So the guy began to work on fine-tuning the bid, and he came back to me and said, Pastor Dan, I was a little off. It wasn't $30,000, it was $125,000. I went home that night to Hilton and said, I did not get into the ministry to do bathrooms. No one taught me how to do that. I don't want to raise money for bathrooms. Not for school, not for kids, not for missions, for bathrooms. I was in a cave. Someone offered me a job that day, I'd have taken it. But by that morning, God had strengthened me. I began to get some ideas of how we could attack it. Different things. We had dinners in our house. And within a few weeks, we raised that money. Every time I go back to that church for a funeral or for something and I see those bathrooms, remember my cave time. God came through. To tell you 100 more. We were in Tonga. We fly all the way down to Tonga, but there were some political issues. Pastors were not supportive at first. Church members just sitting there watching to see if we were different from all the other missionaries that had come. I had the biggest church in downtown. There was no reception table. There was no one greeting at the door. People sitting spread out. I had to go each one, shake hands, light up. But a week later, it broke. We had one of the greatest experiences in my life. We couldn't get on a plane. It seemed like so many people out there to say goodbye to us. God does some of his best work in caves. So what are some of the secrets of the cave? Number one, you have to cry out. It says in Psalm 142, I cry out to the Lord. I beg for mercy. I pour out my complaints before him. I tell him all my troubles. When you're in the cave, it starts here, is going to God and crying out. You have to call it, you have to name it. I'm in a cave, I'm in a slump. This is not good. Jesus was willing to do that. Jesus says, I wish this cup could be taken from me there in the garden. And to be able to say, I'm not at the top of my game right now, and I need help. Call it, admit it. This is where we are. It's not a sin to say this is the way things are, and things ought to be better than this. To say, not accept it. Refuse to accept this situation. David said, this is not the way it's going to be or supposed to be. Cry out to God. Supposed to be the king. Man went into a tattoo shop. China, somewhere, Hong Kong. Here were all the different tattoos you could have, and there was one that said, Born to Lose. You can see pictures of it on the internet. People walk in there, you're going to put something on your skin out of all the choices, born to lose. The tattoo artist guy said, before tattoo on body, tattoo in mind. Born to lose. Now you can't accept it. You fight it. David strengthened himself in the Lord. This is not the way it's going to be. Do something. David asked God, what should I do? If I go after them, will you bless me? God says, go. David doesn't just sit there and cry. He says, okay, let's go. And he gathers his men together, and they go and they get all the women and the children back, and they rebuild the village. Do something. Do something. You cannot just sit there and pray. Prayer leads you to doing something. Think about whatever is putting you in the cave. What got you there, and then say, okay, what do I have to do to get out of this particular cave? Change something, reverse something. If you don't have a job, go back to school to get another career, begin to network and begin to call. You begin to do something to begin to get out of the cave and say, I'm not going to accept this cave. If you wish you could be married, then you've got to put yourself where people make relationships. Reach out, stretch out, go online. If you're lonely, then you go to where people are. You go to church, you go to a small group, you go to a community, you go to the gym. You do something. Maybe not right now, we're a little weird, but get in a small group, get on a Zoom group. There's all kinds of groups. If your house is a mess, you start. Go to one drawer, one closet, one room, and just say, I'm going to begin to reclaim this space. If your weight got out of control, you begin to walk every day. Do something. Do something to get out of the cave. One person talked about marriage. If your marriage is in trouble, don't got to fix it all overnight. 10% every year. If you get 10% every year, you do the compound interest, you'll be phenomenal by the end. Another person talked about 1% a day. Just get a little bit better, 1% a day. In a year, that's 365%. Thought about Beck Weathers. Beck Weathers was a doctor or surgeon, I think, in Dallas, Texas. He ends up on that group up on Mount Everest that a number of people died. You can read Into Thin Air and movies. And somehow he was most of the way back down when the storm hit. But he and a couple others were stranded. They realized they were going to have to spend the night on the top of this mountain, not in a tent. It's called the death zone, the killing zone. The other two died. But somehow, after 22 hours in the storm, Beck Weathers woke up and he said, I am not going to accept this. I think he was blind. And he just got up and he began to stumble down, just go down. And he stumbled into camp, and he's alive today. And he's got some stuff missing, but he's alive and goes around and speaks. Do something. Don't just sit there and pray. How many people I know have been sitting in a cave and just living with it? Famous story about the witch doctor. Someone came up here with a witch doctor, was throwing his little sticks, trying to decide which way to go in a fork on the road. But he kept throwing the stick. He said, how come you keep throwing the stick? He said, I don't want to go where the stick is showing me. And we get into these situations and God begins to lead us a pathway out, but we refuse to go. We don't want to go where God leads us. Do something. Go. See what God will do. Thomas Carlyle wrote a book. Took 2 years to write the book. A friend wanted to read the draft. He gave the friend the draft. Somehow a servant thought it was scratch paper and threw it into the fire to make a fire. 2 years' work gone. And Carlyle happened to go by and saw someone building a wall with bricks, one brick at a time. I guess I could do that, write for one day, one page at a time. A few weeks later, had the book back again. There was an old man that just retired. Down in the South, he's sitting on his porch, waiting for the first Social Security check to come. And he said, this is what my life is now, sitting here waiting for my Social Security check. He said, what do I have that I can do? He thought, I have a great chicken recipe from my mother or grandmother. Went down to a restaurant and he said, I got a great recipe. Would you let me cook my chicken in your place? He had 11 herbs and spices. Sure. Did so well, the whole town loved it, to begin to open up his own Kentucky Fried Chicken, became Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders all over the world. Do something. No shortcuts. Sometimes when you're in a cave, it's tempting to say, okay, I tried to do it right, but that didn't work. Let me do what I have to do and take shortcuts. David and his men are in a cave. Saul walks in, lies down to go to sleep, and David's men whisper to him, God has done this. God has put him here for such a time as this. It is your right. You're supposed to be the king. He's been a terrible king. God has quit blessing him. Kill him, and you'll be the king. And David says, I am not taking a shortcut. He is the Lord's anointed. I will not harm the Lord's anointed. Sometimes when you're in a cave, it's tempting to take a shortcut. Take a drink. Make the problems go away. Sleep with somebody if you're lonely. Go to the mall and blow a bunch of money on a credit card and make yourself feel better. Shortcuts. Cut corners morally to get where you think you need to go. And here it says, even if you're in a cave, don't compromise. No shortcuts. Number 4, find refuge in God alone. David found a way to say, I'm going to go to God. I'm not going to go anywhere else. I'm going to go to God. Yes, sometimes God will send you people, and God sent families to David. 400 men came to help him one time. Jonathan came one time, said, David, don't give up. Someday you're going to be the king. And God has sent me many people over the years that just right when the time I needed, I was in a cave and someone calls, someone gives you a note, someone encourages you, someone says, that's just great what you're going to do. I'll be here for you. But there are other times when you're alone. There's no one around. It's the middle of the night or you're out in the middle of a situation and you're going through hell and you're in a cave. And you got to go to God and know that God will be there for you. And He will lift your spirits and lift your soul and begin to find a way out of the cave. Well, here's the gospel. Number 1, you don't have to be perfect in order for God to come to you in a cave. David was not perfect. David was violent. If Saul said, go kill 100, David would kill 200. He killed people. He did some hard things. And he lied and he counted the people when he wasn't supposed to, and David made mistakes. But when he called upon God in the cave, God was there. You don't have to be perfect to call on God to come to you when you're in a cave. It's always grace. And now you think about this. I think this is from John Ortberg. He said, Jesus knows something about being in caves. You think about the parallel. Jesus is the son of David. He is the King of Kings. He's supposed to be the best at ruling the universe. Gives it all up. Comes down in a wilderness. Ends up being killed by his own people. All the disciples run away. He is alone. He begs for God to come to him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let him out. Jesus went through a cave time. Ends up buried in a grave. But God does some of his best works in graves. He resurrects dead stuff in caves. And Jesus came walking out. They rolled that stone away in the guard, and Jesus came walking out. And God will do that for you. He does some of his best work in caves. And then if we can go one more step. The Bible says in Revelation 15, someday there's going to be a group of people standing on the sea of glass, victorious over the beast. David's victory over Goliath is a microcosm and a promise, a prophecy that someday you and I, we are the Davids, we as the remnant of God are going to be victorious over the Goliath, over the beast. And someday we're going to be like David, who just couldn't stand it when he heard God was being defied. And David says, why is no one fighting this? And we are going to hear God's name and God's character defamed. And there comes a point we're going to not take it anymore. And we will say, we will be the ones to destroy this beast. And we will pick up a stone. And we will begin to speak. And we will begin to speak truth. And we will be victorious over the beast. It's going to happen. And you and I are going to be a part of that. It's going to come. And we will say like David, I come against you in the name of the Lord God Almighty. And we will shout the truth of God, and we will slay the beast that's been defying God. Thinking about a story that Tony Campolo tells. Went to a funeral, black funeral. Clarence had died. Clarence is lying there, preacher preached for 15, 20 minutes. All the things about Clarence. Then all of a sudden, he just said, that's it. That's enough, Clarence. Good night, Clarence. We'll see you in the morning. He closed the lid. Someday in the great getting up morning, we'll see you again, Clarence. Goodbye till then. Black gospel choir began to sing. That great getting up morning, we will rise, we will rise. That's the secret of the cave that we learned from the story of David. Our God is a big God. And if you're in a cave time, and things are going difficult, encourage yourself in the Lord, and God will give you the power to rise. And someday we're all going to rise. May God bless you. If you're in a cave today, may you strengthen yourself in the Lord. And God has a plan to bring you out of that cave. Don't accept it. God has something better for you. This is God Talk. God bless you.